Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was March 29th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today we have another document from Violant. It's from her more businessy register, the Commune et Curie. And before we get into it, it's got a lot of interesting aspects. I do want to touch base about the AI usage that I'm experimenting with using OpenClaw and having an AI agent do some of the uploading and transferring of transcriptions from Gemini to Claude. So it's proceeding along. It's got its downsides, that's for sure. So let me explain. Well, it's got its tremendous upsides. So I tested it out for one register and had it run overnight, and it went really well in the sense that I was able to get some output that I can search, and I did a couple full text searches, and I was able to find some interesting things. So the problem is that the Gemini part of the process just didn't happen. So there's some kinds of restrictions on usage that this sort of thing really runs up against, because what I'm asking to have done here is a pretty intensive task, a lot of tokens, as they say, because the AI, the large language model, has to analyze the image file, find the letters, do the paleography, produce a transcription. That is asking a lot. It's not the same as having an AI agent just manage your calendar for you or send some emails, which, by the way, I would not advise doing at this point. Because, I don't know, I just think you should sort of know what's going on. I don't know, maybe I'm just not thinking of that in the right way, and someone can help me understand why that would be a good thing to do. Anyway, so I'm really hitting usage limits a whole lot. And in the second register that I'm trying this out with, I have to essentially have the AI agent, the OpenClaw, on this machine that I'm using, delay its requests to Gemini. So basically it has to, and I'm not the one that thought of that. So the OpenClaw agent checked what was going on with Gemini and found that even though I have signed up for the level of service that you pay for, that there's just these universal usage limits, that this kind of task makes it so that you can't do it at the speed that it can be done from the agent's point of view. So the agent is changing its workflow so that instead of sending things to Gemini at the speed that it can, it's basically adding in a 30-second pause between every single document. And then that will hopefully comply with the usage requirements that Gemini has. I feel like in 5 years' time, people will look back at this and just kind of chuckle. Well, if there's not an AI apocalypse between now and then. But if we're still around in 5 years' time, people will look back at this and chuckle because these usage limits are of course going to disappear as capabilities increase over the next couple years. I would be quite shocked if this sort of problem would occur after 5 years of further development. All right, so that's one issue where I have not yet successfully replicated my exact workflow with OpenClaw running things because of that Gemini usage limit. But Claude is able to move at that speed. It is just costly. So basically, the price that I paid for the first register that I did this with, from start to end, it was about $50. So, that's not going to be happening for all of the registers that contain content from 1387. I think I'm just going to be picking 5 registers, and still, that's a chunk of change right there. So the cost barrier is significant right now, and I have to make some choices because I don't have institutional funding for this. And I guess that's something I should look into, but that takes a lot of time to figure out. All right, well, anyway. So those are the limitations, the usage limits, and the time. So we're going to see what happens with this next round when we have OpenClaw building in a 30-second pause in the way that it interacts with Gemini. It'll probably help to manage things with Claude also. But let me talk about the quality of the output for a moment, because, well, for today's document, I did what I have been doing for the last couple weeks, which is I've uploaded it to Gemini, had Gemini do a transcription, then I upload the image of the document to Claude, and I have Claude do a transcription, and then I take what Gemini did and I feed that into the Claude chat and say, reconcile these. Now, today's document is in Latin, and it's a little bit more challenging because, well, I don't know, sometimes I get a feeling like the language difference doesn't really matter to them too much, but maybe the paleography in this one is a little bit more difficult. It doesn't, as I'm looking at it, it doesn't strike me. I guess there's more abbreviations when they're writing in Latin, actually. More of a diversity of abbreviation in the Latin documents, I think I'm noticing. So I think that's part of the issue, and possibly this particular scribe is challenging. He's not good old Bartolomeo Sirvent. Oh, Bartolomeo Sirvent is my favorite scribe, I think. No, this is Andres Granelli, who we've had a couple times before. So both Gemini and Claude struggled mightily with this one. And I actually thought that the product that I got after Claude reconciled what Gemini had done was so problematic, and the document was short enough that I just went in and I typed in my own transcription. And I mean, I'm not good enough to have found everything perfectly, but I did enough to be able to make some breakthroughs on certain words that had been stumping everybody. Like in the 4th line, there's the second word, it's got a pro abbreviation, and then a little, looks, at first you look at it and you think it might be a V, and then you realize, oh, that's an X. But I didn't quite get to the X. I feel now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, come on. I really should have understood that was an X. And for some reason, I was just not wanting to go that route when I was looking at it before. I can't quite figure out what I was thinking because it is pro and then X with a macron above, which would make sense to expand as proxima. So that line doesn't seem to have anything about time, but if you go back to the end of line 3, you've got the word da, day. So something like the 6th day after, and then some kind of form of domina or dominica, proxima, or it could actually be the Sunday. The Sunday, because what we have, that would be interesting. If that first word of line 4 is actually the word for Sunday, like domingue. So that's super interesting. I think it is now that I'm working it out because the 4th word of line 4 is Quasimodo. And when I hear Quasimodo, I immediately think of The Hunchback of Notre Dame and like the Disney version that I saw when I was younger. But of course, it's based on a novel and by Victor Hugo. And there's a character named Quasimodo in there. I think in both of those. I have not read the novel. Anyway, that is very misleading because this is not about the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Actually, what I learned today, because of Claude, well, I think also Gemini picked up on this. I can't quite remember, but at least one of the chatbots understood that Quasimodo was potentially actually the name for a holiday. The Sunday following Easter Sunday, one of its names is Quasimodo. And that's because the word Quasimodo means something like that's like newly changed. And there's something about like the baby Jesus newly changed. I don't know. I didn't get into it too much. I'll put in the Wikipedia page. I'm being super lazy about that. All right. So that is just one example of how I was able, with my intervention, to get past something that, well, and the chatbots help. We worked together. It was a real, Ethan Mollick has his book about AI, which I highly recommend. I'll put in the bibliography for this page. The title is Co-Intelligence, and this is absolutely an instance of a co-intelligence. So that's the update with AI. And if you haven't noticed already, this podcast is almost like, has like a shadow podcast in it. And, the shadow podcast is a journal of how AI has developed in the months that I'm looking at these documents. And we're adding to that as we try our AI agent, and we'll see what happens. But all of that is to say that even when the AI agent is able to run an entire register of images through Gemini and Claude and to replicate what I do, it's still missing that step that I used today, which is to notice that the transcription, for whatever reason, was particularly low quality, and to intervene before the final thing. I can still intervene as I'm looking at these things later, but just think about the implications for when I'm trying to do something like a full text search for letters about certain things. So it's just a reminder that if I'm going to be searching the big data that comes out of what the AI agent generates, I need to be searching for different things in different ways and not just one little search and saying, oh, nothing came up. That must mean it's not there. Nope. It's got to be treated as like a rudimentary data set and not anything like a critical edition. All right, let's talk about this document. This document is an example of interfaith context. So Violant is telling the addressee, who appears right in that first line, Cresques Bonafos. Cresques is a pretty common Jewish name, and in fact, that name came up. I don't know if it's a family relation or just a coincidence, but in the letter from Joan about the map, the Catalan Atlas, the Mallorcan school of cartographers had the Cresques family, the father, son, and probably others who were cartographers there. But I don't see that there's any connection to this particular Cresques in today's document because this person lives in Figueres. Now, I'm pretty sure we're talking about Figueres, the third from the last word of line 1 has the two F's, which clues you in that it's a proper name. And it's got Figiis as the spelling. And that diagonal stroke above the word, I think, is like the dot on the I. I don't think that there's an abbreviation. I think that the Latin name for Figueres just doesn't have the R. But I'm not entirely sure. The chatbots, that's what they came up with, too, that it's Figueres. We're going to go with that for now, but I still want to say that's provisional. And the word before de Figueres, or de Figiis, is Judei, actually. So he's being identified as a Jew of the town of Figueres. And then what's really interesting is that really quick into it, on the second line, we see that there's been a supplication, some kind of petition, and the fourth word is regino. I think that means that it was a supplication to the queen. And then we have UX and then TUE. And the macron over the UX is very faint, but it is there. So this is uxore tue, your wife. And then we've got some adjectives afterwards. Paupis et miserabilis. So she's poor and miserable. So something has gone wrong with this marriage because the wife of Cresques Bonafos has made some kind of supplication to the queen. And the chatbots were thinking that the name of the wife is Regina. I do not think so. I don't think so. I think that's dative, the Regino, and that it means that the supplication was for or to the queen. And so basically the letter is mandating that Cresques Bonafos on the 6th day after Quasimodo shows up to Barcelona and answers this, and they're going to work it out, and they're going to get some justice. And I think that's pretty much what it amounts to. There's some other intriguing words in this letter that I'm not quite sure how it all fits together. And I think the paleography prevented the chatbots from getting like a really great translation of this into English. But I think that this is absolutely fascinating that we have the queen getting involved in a complaint about a husband being, and that complaint has been submitted by the wife, and that this is a Jewish couple. And so I think this is super interesting. There's another instance that has come up in the historiography that this reminds me of, and it's in the latest book by Marie Kelleher, The Hungry City. And Marie Kelleher tells the story of Bonadonna, who was also a Jewish woman who used the legal system to get justice against a husband. And so I think this is a super interesting echo of that, because the episode that Marie Kelleher talks about occurred earlier in the century, and a different monarch. And well, I don't even know if that one went to as high as the king or queen actually. So here, I mean, they're going all the way to the chief legal authority, since this is in Violant's portfolio. So it's super interesting, and I really want to know what happened here. And this is where, my progress using the AI agent can come in, because once this is improved and once, the cost comes down, there's so many records in the archive of the Crown of Aragon, not just the letters from the royal family, but all kinds of like civic records. And then there's other in the same kind of paleography, there's in the same kind of script, there's other records from other archives. And to make them full text searchable, one day, maybe not too far in the future, I would be able to go in and do a search for Cresques Bonafos and find out more about what was happening here. Because in its usual form, we have a letter that doesn't really state specific things. It's all just, the case, or the complaint, right? Or the supplication. All right, thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. The AI chat transcripts for today's episode, I think, are going to be really interesting to look at. The one from Claude in particular. There will be two that you can look at. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.